No show to date has done better in terms of creating an authentic representation of modern Indigenous people than Reservation Dogs.
This is Daniel. He died last year. We're having a memorial for him in a couple of days. R.I.P. my dog. This place killed him. That's why we're saving our money so we can leave this dump before it kills us too.
Cinematically filmed and stylized with a touch of 1990s indie grit, Reservation Dogs marks a crucial representational victory for Indigenous communities and intriguing audiences of all backgrounds with its subversive, unapologetically Native-specific humor. So what's it about? Using smart comedy and dark jokes, the show explores the hijinks and endearing bond between four Native teens on a reservation in Oklahoma, as Bear, Alora, Willie Jack, and Cheese commit a string of small-time heists to raise money to escape the small town they've come to despise. Reservation Dogs is mainly a slice-of-life comedy that lets us take along with the characters on very regular adventures, like when Bear sustains an injury requiring a trip to the local clinic where tired staff runs the place like a regular bureaucracy.
Did you tell your mom?
No, I didn't. And you shouldn't either. You know, like patient-doctor protocol or whatever it's called.
I'm not a doctor.
Another quest leads them to Alora's uncle, an unstoppable brawler back in his day who has since turned into a paranoid connoisseur of ancient weed.
You a shapeshifter?
Fuck you, say. Well, you lay that on me, that bad medicine comes out of your mouth and squirts all over my face. Maybe you're a shapeshifter.
One thing to note about this show is that it is also the first American television show created by, written by, and directed by Indigenous artists. It shouldn't feel so revolutionary, but for all its unpretentiousness, it does. The portrayal of Indigenous people in cinema throughout the decades had been faceless, soulless husks that folks like John Wayne would heroically dispose of in the name of the Great Western Expansion. Hollywood had declared that Indigenous people were the obstacle in the way of progress. This led to a false image of a group of people who have been antagonized over and over throughout history. Before Native-led and created projects like Reservation Dogs, there weren't exactly a lot of attractive opportunities for Native talent in Hollywood. Hollywood makes a Western every few years when Native actors get to come and get killed in front of a camp. One of the things that became clear in Indigenous storytelling is all the stories that were being told were always funny. And Native people represented in Hollywood, you never get to see that humor. It's always so earnest and so sad or depressing. It's not really reflective of Indigenous communities. Indigenous people have survived because of their humor. The cleverest filmmaking odes in Reservation Dogs tell on the mainstream audience by satirizing racist tropes perpetuated by Hollywood that have taken root in the culture. Like in The Spirit Guide.
I came over that hill real rugged, like, I saw Custer like that. That yellow hair, he was sitting there. Son of the morning star, that guy right there. Fuck, I really hated him. So I went after him. But then the damn horse hit a gopher hole. Fucking rolled over and squashed me.
Spirit is the perfect encapsulation of the Reservation Dogs ethos, which is taking all the stereotypical nonsense that surrounds Native Americans and tossing it out in favor of everyday realism. Reservation Dogs is born out of a micro-genre wherein comedy flourishes in settings most have been allowed to see only as tragic. The fun heists on Reservation Dogs give way to painting a deeper picture of the characters' lives. They're simultaneously trying to fight off the boredom of life on the reservation, reckon with grief after the death of their friend 1 year ago, defend their place in town against a rival teen gang, and experience the coming-of-age growing pains familiar to teens of all backgrounds. The show was co-created by Sterling Harjo and Taika Waititi, both Indigenous filmmakers. I've been a fan of Taika Waititi ever since seeing his 2010 film Boy, and I'm sure I'll make a separate video about him very soon. But today, I wanted to focus on Sterling Harjo, because this show is basically his life. Harjo was born and raised in Oklahoma, where the show was shot and set, and the many everyday storylines of Reservation Dogs are based loosely on the ups and downs of his childhood. Harjo establishes the innate goodness of the teens straight away too. They're mostly outlaws in their own minds. And that's only possible because they live in a place where everybody knows everybody else. Like the policeman who's a light horseman called Big, who knows what they are up to, but unwilling to punish them because he understands that they are inherently good people.
So why didn't you arrest them?
Oh, because I'm after bad guys. Bucky's a good one.
How do you know which ones are good?
You gotta use your detective skills. Mr. Detective?
Reservation Dogs' vision of the Indigenous neighborhoods is a stark one. Bound by poverty and institutional neglect, battered buildings are being overgrown with weeds, legitimate ways to make a living are few and far between, and the local clinic is overcrowded, but it's funny in the best way possible. This show isn't all heavy and depressing, but in its own way, it also doesn't shy away from the realities of the underinvestment of resources in Native communities and reservations, the inaccessibility of healthcare, diabetes and other health problems, the struggles with addiction, and more. The show's honest comedy, and even its deep specificity to Native experiences, is especially enjoyable because of its relatability even to non-Natives, who can see their own culture-specific counterparts in the different storylines on the show. Anyone can relate to the dread of wanting to leave your boring, dead-end hometown. Even so, the show isn't shy to make content deeply specific to Native people. From extensive references to previous on-screen portrayals of Native characters, to the sharing of family meat pie recipes, fry bread, the show is a pure celebration of Native culture. The show also has cameos of Indigenous actors from the past. Macone Blair pops up as a convenience store clerk. Wes Studi plays a local man who is nonetheless charming and interesting, not the usual depiction of a sad sack Native. And yes, there are plenty of references to Quentin Tarantino too. Hell, the show's name itself is a reference to Reservoir Dogs, if you didn't catch that yet. The kids are growing up in Indian territory, but they're still teens in America. Pop culture informs their world as much as the old stories do. It's also laced with the everyday conversations people have around Indigenous spaces. The triumph of Reservation Dogs is that it subverts the long history of exclusively depressing storytelling about Natives, often written by non-Indigenous creators and writers, and replaces it with authentic representation of a modern Indigenous community. This show is such a big hit with the Indigenous community because those that grew up in a reservation in California or New Mexico, even in Canada where I live, it's so similar. I know people who talk like the characters do, who eat the same fry bread, deer meat, and use the same cultural practices. As storytelling about Native people written and portrayed by Native people grows and expands, it's because of projects like Reservation Dogs that non-Native people's sole perception of Native culture will no longer be rooted in tragedy and whitewashed mysticism. It will be about the relatability and authenticity of seeing someone who is like you in media, and that's part of the beauty of storytelling. Indigenous people are the original storytellers after all, and can they tell funny stories? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.